There have been several high-profile cases featured in the British news in recent months of serving police officers convicted of serious crimes, including murder. In February 2023, David Kerrick, a 48-year-old firearms officer with the Metropolitan Police, was sentenced to over 30 years in prison after a 17-year crime spree. Kerrick, who pleaded guilty to 85 offences, including 48 rapes, was brought to justice after a woman decided to report the attack on her after reading about the crimes of another serving officer, Wayne Couzens. 2 years earlier, in June 2021, Wayne Couzens kidnapped Sarah Everard near Clapham Common in London. He then drove her to Dover in Kent, where she was sexually assaulted and strangled. Couzens then tried to dispose of her body by setting it alight before dumping it in a pond. Convicted at the Old Bailey, he was jailed for life, with the judge confirming he would serve a whole-of-life term. Looking back through the list of executed criminals as featured in my books, The Hangman's Record 1868 to 1964, we see there have only ever been 2 serving police officers hanged for murder. The first took place 130 years ago, in the latter part of the 19th century, when 27-year-old PC George Cook was convicted of the murder of Maud Smith. Like the 2 recent cases, Cook was serving in the Metropolitan Police, and his beat was the area of West London around Wormwood Scrubs. He had previously had a relationship with Maud Smith, who worked as a prostitute around the Strand area of London. Cook had broken off contact with her when he became engaged, but she took to following around on his beat and threatening to expose him and ruin his new relationship. In a fit of rage, in June 1893, he battered her to death with his truncheon in the shadows of the prison. Justice was swift in this case, and despite claims he should be convicted of manslaughter due to extreme provocation, barely a month later he was convicted at the Central Criminal Court and hanged at Newgate Prison by James Billington. There was only one other serving policeman to pay the ultimate penalty, and this story begins shortly after midnight at the end of July 1950, when a body was found lying in the road near Hampden Park football ground in Glasgow, Scotland. It had all the hallmarks of a hit-and-run accident. Shortly before midnight on Thursday the 27th of July, taxi driver John Kennedy was heading along Prospect Hill Road, Mount Florida, on the south side of Glasgow, when his headlights picked out something lying in the road a few feet from the pavement. His first instinct was it was a drunk lying in the road, but as he got closer he could make out in the headlights the figure of a woman. Kennedy hurried from his cab, but one look told him she was beyond help and appeared to be the victim of a hit-and-run accident. He radioed his controller and told them to call the police. Police Constable William Kevin of Glasgow's Police Traffic Division was first to the scene. With many years' service he had attended hundreds of road accidents, but surveying the pitiful sight before him, he noted the injuries were probably the worst he had ever seen. The victim was a female aged around 40 with blonde hair and wearing a fawn coat over a crimson dress. She was lying on her back, twisted and bloodied and heavily stained with motor oil. It had been reported as a probable accident, but the officer wasn't satisfied. Working by the light of his torch, he examined the scene closely. 2 things did not add up. Firstly, there was a lack of glass in the road. Kevin knew that when a car knocked a person over, there was invariably broken glass from the headlight or indicator, especially if the car had been travelling at speed. Judging from the extent of the injuries, the car must have been going fast. There was also something unusual about the tyre marks. There was too many for a simple hit and run. It appeared that the car had skidded to a halt, reversed, stopped suddenly and then driven forward again. One set of tracks were straight, the other joined at an angle. Kevin relayed his suspicions to the CID. In the meantime, pathologist Professor Andrew Allison of St Mungo's College examined the body and concurred with the constable's findings. If the victim had been struck by a car, he would have expected to find injuries to the leg around the level of the bumper bar, but there was no sign of any injury in that area. Allison finished the post-mortem and reported that the death was suspicious, and it was probably a case of murder. Officers set about identifying the victim. Glasgow City Police launched a press appeal for anyone who might recognise the woman, as she had no identification on her at the time. When a report of the accident appeared in the Friday evening paper, Mrs Grace Johnston came forward to say she had been babysitting for a Kathleen McCluskey who had failed to come home last night. She visited the mortuary and identified the body. Catherine was a 40-year-old unmarried mother of 2 young boys who lived in lodgings on Nicholson Street in the Gorbals district of the city and police soon found a wealth of information about her. She had a number of male friends who would all need to be interviewed, but one name cropped up several times. A police officer known as Big Ronnie was rumoured to be the father of her youngest child, and detectives were told that he often gave her money. Grace Johnson said that on the night of her death, Catherine told her she had arranged to see Ronnie and had promised to help her find new lodgings. Big Ronnie was Constable 138D James Ronald Robertson, stationed at Glasgow South Division. He was 33 years old, tall, well built and sported a small moustache. Married with 2 children, Robertson was a member of the ultra-strict Plymouth Brethren with a good record and had earned a number of commendations. Lately, however, his conduct had given his superiors cause for concern, and more than once he had been reprimanded for being absent from his beat. For the past month he had also been driving a large black car which he told colleagues had been loaned to him by a friend. The vehicle involved was found abandoned and Robertson was arrested on suspicion of murder. On the following afternoon, dressed for the last time in his police uniform, he stood in an identity parade between many of his colleagues. Friends of the dead woman were invited to attend and several pointed him out as Catherine's boyfriend. A forensic team under the direction of Professor John Glaister of Glasgow University examined the vehicle minutely and found ample evidence on its underside to connect it with the injuries on Catherine McCluskey's body. Robertson was grilled by CID officers and told them he had found the car abandoned, and on checking the records had discovered it had been stolen and decided to keep it for himself. He also admitted knowing Catherine McCluskey and that he was the father of her second child. The interview went on into the early hours and ended with him being charged with murder. Former Constable James Ronald Robertson stood trial at Glasgow High Court on Monday the 6th of November 1950 before Lord Keith. He pleaded not guilty. There were a number of other charges brought against him, one for the theft of a number of logbooks and a radio from a car showroom, and another for the theft of the Black Austin motor car from the city centre. Harold Leslie KC, leading for the prosecution, alleged that he had attacked Catherine McCluskey with his truncheon, then repeatedly driven over the stricken body, fatally injuring her, the motive being that he had become tired of her increasing demands for maintenance money for their child. The stolen logbooks had been found in his room. One had been altered to match the Black Austin which was alleged to have been used in the murder. It was locked in a garage and forensic officers found blood and hair on the underside identified as belonging to the victim. Robertson said that on that day he had been driving down Prospect Hill Road when he spotted Mrs McCluskey and had stopped to speak to her. He said she had asked him for a lift, but he had to refuse because he was on duty. He had left her and driven away, but had then changed his mind and stopping had reversed the car. He said he could not see her as he reversed, but had then felt the car bump over something. Jumping out, he saw to his horror he had run her down. When he tried to move the car off her, he found the body had become jammed under the vehicle, and he had driven backwards and forwards until he had managed to get clear. Robertson's truncheon also had faint traces of blood on it, which matched the same group as Catherine's. PC Doug Moffat, who shared the same beat as the accused, said that on the night of the murder, Robertson had told him he was going to take a blonde home and went off duty. He arrived back shortly after 1 AM looking dishevelled and claimed that the exhaust had fallen off his car. Prosecution evidence took up 5 days. On the 6th it was the turn of the defence. John Cameron told the court the defence was that Catherine McCluskey's death was a tragic accident. Their first witness was a prisoner. Robertson claimed to have found the car and although he knew it had been reported stolen, had decided to keep it for himself, altering the log registration to avoid recognition. He also claimed to have found logbooks in a Gorbals back street. Robertson described the relationship with the deceased, who he said he had met a few years earlier when he was investigating a disturbance at a house where she was living. He admitted meeting her on the night of her death. She was trying to find new lodgings after being thrown out of her last place, and he agreed to help her. She asked him to take her to a place out of town, but as he was still on duty, he told her he could not spare the time. They began to quarrel and she began to cry. They drove towards Mount Florida, and reaching the unlit Prospect Hill Road, he pulled over and told her he had to return to duty. They quarrelled again and she stormed out of the car, refusing to get back in. Robertson claimed he drove away, but 200 yards down the road he changed his mind and stopped. The court listened in silence as he explained what happened next. He said he put the car into reverse and drove back down the road. Suddenly he heard a bump. Jumping from the car, he found Catherine lying under the wheels. He could see she was dying and made frantic efforts to pull her free. Being unable to do so, Robertson assumed her clothing must have become entangled in the prop shaft, so he eased the car forward, stopped, then reversed back again. Although he was now able to release her, it was too late. It was a serious predicament. Robertson knew he would be in big trouble for being absent from his beat and driving a stolen car, so he decided to try and pass it off as an accident. He left the body in the road and returned to his beat, stopping only to do a temporary repair to the now damaged exhaust. The prosecution challenged his story on a number of accounts, but the main point being his claim that he tried to pull her from beneath the vehicle. If that was the case, then his clothes would have been covered in blood. However, that would not be so if he had casually knocked her down and driven off. The fact that he drove back to his beat, resumed his patrol as if nothing had happened, did not sit well with the jury. Robertson, who had taken an oath to protect and serve, had been known to be a thief, a liar, and a man of very dubious morals. On Monday the 13th of November, after a trial lasting 7 days, the jury took just 64 minutes to find Robertson guilty of murder. He showed little emotion as sentence was passed, and he was led down to the cell. His wife, watching from the public gallery, burst into tears as sentence of death was passed. She gave an interview with a local paper claiming she believed her husband was innocent, that an appeal would overturn the conviction. An appeal was launched but was unsuccessful, merely postponing the scheduled date of execution from the 4th of December. A revised execution date of Saturday the 16th of December was set, and letters sent out to 2 executioners, Albert Pierpoint and Steve Wade. Wade had been promoted to a chief executioner in March 1946, and work as assistant became less frequent. He was, however, still regularly engaged in Scotland as an assistant to Albert Pierpoint. At 8 o'clock on a cold Saturday morning, 9 days before Christmas, former PC 138D James Ronald Robertson was hanged at Barlinnie Jail, Glasgow. It was only a few steps from the condemned cell to the scaffold, and in less than 20 seconds from leaving the cell, Pierpoint pushed the lever and the prisoner was dead. It was never made clear why the argument between Catherine McCluskey and Ronnie Robertson had turned to violence, nor once he had carried out the murderous attack and Robertson ever thought he would get away with the crime. One theory is that he made up the lies of not knowing Catherine to protect the reputation of his own family, and also with the absence of DNA evidence, it could not be proved he was the father of Catherine's second child. Curiously enough, Robertson, as we've seen, was a member of the Plymouth Brethren. 12 months earlier, acid bath murderer John Haig was hanged at London's Wandsworth Jail, and he too had grown up following the same strict nonconformist Christian movement. Had a less vigilant traffic officer attended the initial incident, it is possible that a hit-and-run verdict may have been recorded in this case, and Big Ronnie Robertson may have escaped justice instead of becoming the last serving policeman to be hanged for murder. My name is Steve Fielding. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode in Tales from the Hangman's Record. Please like and share this video, and if you don't already, can you please subscribe to the channel to keep up with new content. Check out my website stevefielding.com, where you can find information on all my books, links to other videos in this series, and also order copies of the 3-volume hardback book, The Hangman's Record, at a special discount price. On sale now is my latest book, Tales from the Hangman's Record, available as a paperback and Kindle download from Amazon. Also look out for 2 new podcasts, Tales from the Hangman's Record and Mostly Murder, available on Spotify and all popular platforms. Finally, please use the comments below for your thoughts on this video and suggestions for further episodes in this series.